A very big news from the medical device industry is that the US FDA is proposing to amend the quality system regulation by integrating the requirements of ISO 13485. Now, to many out there, it may not be a big deal because they're already compliant to these two requirements. But for many other small, medium, large manufacturers, this could be a significant challenge in execution. Hello everyone, I'm Naveen Agarwal and welcome to this video recording of our recent Q&A session where we talked about this topic, especially in the context of the big picture. What may be FDA's expectations in future from manufacturers about effective implementation of risk management across the QMS? Now, compliance is certainly important and one thing, but effective implementation is what matters at the end of the day, because we want to ensure that products are safe and effective and they meet all the regulatory requirements. So how to balance the two, the compliance requirements and effectiveness expectations? We talked a lot about that. We briefly discussed some key aspects of software risk management, which will be a topic in future discussions. But these sessions we do every month, and the intent here is to have a very casual conversation with each other. It is not a one-way flow of information, but rather more collaborative, where all of us share our opinions, our challenges, and best practices. So I hope you will consider joining us next time. In the meantime, feel free to join our knowledge sharing forum, where you can continue this conversation with your colleagues. I look forward to hearing from you and hopefully seeing you in one of our next sessions. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I call it Destination QMSR, right? It's coming. And although we don't expect a whole lot of problems for many people, I think there's somebody joining. Many people, many companies. I did a LinkedIn poll, and I'll show you some data on that. I asked this question: how challenging would it be for you to more explicitly integrate risk in your QMS to comply with FDA's proposed rule? Now, most of the people said, 63% have said not challenging. They're already doing it, which is what we expect from most of the big companies. But I was interested to see that about 30%, roughly 30% are going to find it somewhat challenging or very challenging. Now, we don't know what those challenges would be, and I think that's the whole point of this discussion today and continued conversation in the future. Many people shared their views in this particular poll, and I want to share with you some of the comments. ISO 13485 and 21 CFR 820 are currently 95% the same, and that makes sense, right? The intent of QSR has always been risk management throughout the QMS. While the regulation uses only the word risk once in the regulation requiring risk analysis, if you read the preamble to the regulation, you will find that FDA's thinking was that risk was a consideration in more areas of the regulation than just risk analysis. And that is absolutely true. Another person wrote, good question. Some companies have not fully integrated risk in the QMS, and they should. Yes, they should. It is a real benefit to using risk to focus on the essential issues. So a lot of it, I think, could also be execution related. And I think that's what we would like to talk about, where the challenges might be. Finally, another comment, which was pretty interesting. I think integration of risk management across the QMS is the only way to actually perform or meet full lifecycle risk management. And that's an expectation already in ISO 14971 standard, as well as regulations worldwide. Yes, absolutely true. The amendment of QSR is not new or unique in that perspective. Absolutely true. The second half of this comment is interesting to me. Even after integration, it is a challenge to keep everyone in the organization aware of risk management and contributing, but together we can succeed to provide safe and secure devices. So I'm guessing, and we'll talk more about this in our discussion, that the challenges are in execution and not necessarily ensuring compliance, just for the sake of revised QMSR requirements. Here's a table I captured from the announcement from FDA in the Federal Register. True that most of the requirements are substantially similar. And here they have some minor changes that they are outlining what might be some new expectations for labeling for records. And that's it. But some of the comments are interesting. ISO 13485, this is FDA's comments in the announcement. ISO 135 has a greater emphasis on risk management activities and risk-based decision-making than the current Part 820. Greater emphasis. FDA, however, has expected that manufacturers led by top management integrate risk management activities throughout their QMS and across the total product lifecycle. This has been an expectation. How well we have met that expectation is, I think, open to discussion. And finally, although the integration of risk management principles throughout ISO 13485 does not represent a shift in philosophy, the explicit integration of risk management throughout the clauses of ISO 13485 more explicitly establishes a requirement for risk management to occur throughout a QMS and should help industry develop more effective total product lifecycle risk management system. So I'll stop sharing here with you all and just mention very quickly that in the context of ISO 13485, we know that the risk is broader. The term risk is broader compared to ISO 14971. So that's point number one. Point number two is, yeah, we could probably claim compliance that we are already doing it. However, it's the execution piece, which is where I would be interested to hear your thoughts, and particularly around CAPA and supplier controls and other areas where you find it difficult to properly integrate the risk management process. And that's it. It's a very open forum, open discussion. All conversations, opinions, challenges, best practices are welcome. So I'll open the floor with this brief intro, which is what I usually do, and invite your comments. So you're welcome.
Naveen, I'd like to open with something about this change in regulation.
Okay.
Because I was around the last time this happened.
Okay.
And when 820 was released back in 96, there's a section called the preamble that most people don't know about, which is a compilation of the questions from responses by manufacturers to the proposed draft, which came out in 94. There were 10,000 comments that the FDA received about that draft. And they were compiled into 200 categories, which are shown in the preamble. And FDA responded to each one of those categories with a statement of why they were going to change it to accept the comment or why they weren't. And it's important for us as an industry to submit comments. And the comment period is still open, I think, until next month, if I'm not mistaken. So you can go on the Federal Register website. Now used to be we had to write, okay, and submit a letter. And the company I was working with, we submitted a letter, and I was on the HEMA Technical and Regulatory Committee, and HEMA later became AdvaMed. And we took letters from all the companies and submitted comments as well. So there were a whole lot of very good comments, very thoughtful comments that people wrote and submitted. And I would recommend that you all read the regulation and do that because that's what helps make it even better. Mm-hmm. You know, based on 1345 is good, but there's certainly some ideas about how we can even make it a lot better. Because I know the FDA, for instance, has taken some of the definitions and mm-hmm. added some of theirs in the proposal. And as you pointed out, there were a couple of areas in there where they've got some added parts of the regulation. 820 about 35 and 45 and
45, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's things that the FDA has submitted that modify what 1345 includes because of the regulatory requirements in the US. They had to do that.
Correct. Let me ask you this, Ed. I think that's a good point. We should definitely contribute to it, but is it okay to also submit a comment trying to seek clarification about how what FDA's approach would be in terms of execution, in terms of checking compliance, because there's quite a lot of difference from ISO 13485 point of view when it comes to risk and what risk analysis is currently covered, how it's covered in part 82030, right, in design controls. So
Yeah,
it's a lot.
There's a statement in the front of 13485, and when this was written, I had a lot of discussion with the 1345 technical committee about this. But they open it up to the risk of regulatory compliance,
Right.
in addition to product safety. So
Right.
they've expanded the scope, and I guess I'll introduce something that's going on behind the scenes right now as well. Is there's another risk standard called ISO 31000, which is for business
Yes.
risk,
Mm-hmm.
and that has different definitions and different expectations than 14971.
Mm-hmm.
And 14971 has a rule that all management system standards will have the same definitions and the same structure. And they want to take 14971 and change it to 31000, basically.
Okay.
We resisted that at the technical committee meeting in London in October 2019. And at that point, the ISO Technical Management Board said, yes, that's appropriate. But now the 31000 technical committee is strong arming the ISO Technical Management Board, trying to change 14971 into a structure of 31000. So
it'll be interesting to see.
That will be a war that's going on, and that also is going to impact 1345 as well. Because
you bring up a good point, because when you read 13485, it says safety or performance,
yes,
or regulatory compliance. So it covers everything.
Yeah.
And I have seen people struggle with this, and I would love to hear from others on the forum today. When I see FMEAs at certain clients, they have line items that have nothing to do with product safety, but they're capturing it to ensure there are controls in place for regulatory compliance, for other performance attributes that are important, but not critical for safety. And this becomes a very difficult thing to kind of manage to satisfy the requirements of 14971 and also satisfy the requirements of 13485. So to me, it seemed challenging. I would love to hear from other folks as well on the forum. What is their experience and thoughts about this?
Yeah, hi, this is Dino. 14971, of course, we've been using mainly, very much so, in a product-based standpoint, product lifecycle. But it's a very, very structured set of requirements, all the documents we have to create. When it comes to the quality management system, again, it probably hasn't been challenged or tested that much from whether it's the FDA or whether it's a notified body as far as how you apply it. But essentially, to me, you apply a risk-based control, higher risk, higher controls, whether that be regulatory risk or other. And I think keeping it somewhat more simple for the quality system, to me, is much more preferable than trying to apply something as complex as 14971 to your quality system. I mean, you can do it, but it's going to be a huge exercise. And I think that it might be better kept as a separate means of establishing how you control risk from a, actually, quality system also impacts product quality, but and risk, but from a regulatory risk too. I think it's much more easy to establish levels of control and define them in your procedures, and define, here's the risk, therefore here's the level of control.
Yeah, so what you are saying, is that we had to recognize the type of risk. Right? People use the term risk broadly, and sometimes we are not sure which risk that is being referred to. 14971 is very, very specific. It's the harm, and they define the harm. 13485 is not very specific, right? 31000 is even less specific. So it increases the scope of risk. And depending upon how you do the risk analysis, the risk estimation, the risk evaluation, acceptability, I have a feeling personally that there'll be a lot of confusion out there as to how to define it for different situations and still be compliant with FDA, with everybody else. So I perceive personally, even though on paper it looks like not much is changing, but I believe in practice, it could pose a lot of challenges. And again, I would love to hear from all of you. What are your thoughts? How are you preparing, for example, in this scenario?
Naveen, I'll say, you know, having worked in an industry where there are a lot of complex products and programs, we were very stringent about keeping our harms-based risk assessment separate from business risk, QMS risks, project risks. And if you don't do that, I mean, I have also then was introduced in different company actually where they hadn't done that and they hadn't policed that, and the risk documents were convoluted combination of business risks and product, you know, project risks mixed in with their harms-based risk assessment, and it was very difficult to get that into a format where you would defend it in front of an auditor, because you couldn't point to one document that said this is the product harms risk assessment 14971. So from a personal point of view, I would be very much against trying to broaden the scope of one or the other to try to cover both, you know, to expand the scope of from either side, you know, the 31,000 series or the 14971. My vote would be to keep them totally separate and focused on the thing that they should be focused on.
Yeah, so that's very interesting. And what I'm concerned here is that if it creates more documentation, if it creates like more work for people, it takes away energy and resources from doing the real development or ensuring real safety. And I personally concerned about that is notified body auditors looking for something different, FDA looking for something different. Internal auditors now have to kind of, you know, look for everything. How is that all going to play out? Or tell me, guys, if I'm overreacting about this. I would love to hear from you.
Well, I want to make one remark. Greg, you got your first example is the right way to do it. The second is the wrong way to do it, certainly. But 62304, the software standard, recently failed in trying to update the standard. And the reason they failed is they tried to expand the area that they were concentrating on into health software, which was a big nebulous term. And so when the final votes came out, it was rejected. So they had to go back and start over again after about 3 or 4 years of work. So that kind of trying to incorporate everything into one is fraught with failure. So hopefully we won't go that way. We can continue to resist the 31,000 attempted takeover of all risk standards and continue to focus 14971 on product safety, and understand that 1345, when they're talking about regulatory compliance, and many of the ways they use risk, it's what is the risk to product safety of this particular item. Okay, so for instance, in CAPA, they allow them to have what do I want to say? Not a one size fits all, but CAPA divided up appropriate to the risk that you find in the issue that you're dealing with. So you look at the safety issues around that particular issue, and then you decide what's the appropriate level of concentration. How many resources do I have? What's the timing that I need? You know, is this going to impact product in the field? All those kinds of things fit together in making a decision about what's the appropriate level of CAPA to address there. And of course, now it's not CAPA, it's CA and PA.
Yeah, that's right.
1345.
That's right. So yes, safety and effectiveness would be the primary concern of regulatory authorities, right? Safety and effectiveness.
Yeah.
At the same time, if you really try to apply 13485, you have to talk about product quality. You have to talk about attributes, product attributes that may not be directly related to safety at a higher severity, right? Everything is related to safety, but maybe at a lower severity. So I think the other way to look at this question would be those of us who have been doing in the industry for a long time, these two systems, FDA QSR and 13485, how have we integrated that? And what are the challenges we have faced? What are the best practices we can share? Maybe there are some nuggets of wisdom there that can be shared broadly with each of us. So I, again, invite you to talk about that based on your experience, if you have done that in your process.
Yeah, your survey showed that 67% of the companies that already got some level of
Right.
Integration. So there's
Right. So I'm sure there are a lot of learnings there. I'm sure there are a lot of learnings and probably still challenges that people face, and how we can learn from that, collaborate with each other to see how best to integrate in future for those who are not doing that yet. So that's the intent of this conversation. What do you guys think? Any thoughts on your, let's say, recent experiences in audits, or just practical experience day to day, maintaining records, documents, procedures? What are some of the challenges you have
I'll
faced?
just say again, maybe again, a little bit what I said before, and maybe give an example. I think with the quality system, we do employ, I do recall the 1345 mentions in a number of places, the matter of establishing risk, but you mentioned before, supplier controls, the level of control has to do with the type of product or service that's being supplied. We have equipment controls where, if something is being used for research only, the level of control is different than something where you're actually going to record V&V data or manufacturing or something like that. So same with training, the type of training, how it's impacting the product. Each system has a means of establishing tiers of control. And that's a risk-based, I mean, that's not, I think when 1345, 2016 first came out, our notified body asked a little bit about that. We were able to demonstrate that with several examples. They were fine with that.
Okay.
Haven't seen FDA look at that so far, but perhaps they'll start looking at it that way. It's very interesting too that FDA's comment about how they write their regulations is "we expect." So, quite often there's a lot of room for whether it's the preamble or whether it's looking back at how FDA's applied their regulations to other companies. It's a little bit less clear and instructive. So you have to work through that. But again, I think that you can go too far to where there's not an added value to whatever you're doing to try to establish compliance with these various standards or regulations. It doesn't benefit anyone really. It just becomes an exercise. So we have to kind of be balanced in that sense.
I think one of the sorry, go ahead. Anybody, go ahead, Ed.
Let me add to Dino's comment there, Naveen. FDA has the 1996 version of 820 is very flexible, because the FDA had, if you go back and read the entire Federal Register notice for that, at the time there were companies that had, I don't know, 250 or more employees. That was the smallest segment of the industry. The majority of the industry had 35 or less employees. So they wrote a regulation that was very flexible to deal with that, in addition to the fact that they're dealing with 1,750 different product types. If you look at the product codes, and I think there's even more now.
Yep.
So they had to be hugely flexible and come up with a regulation that was I'll say it, a one size fits all. That when they came in to do an inspection, they could see how people met the intent of the regulation and allow that flexibility for all those different cases that they were looking at. Unlike the pharmaceutical industry, which is very prescriptive
Mhm.
in the way they do things, and is mostly, well, it was before it started outsourcing, a very large and single process type organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that is very interesting to me is reading FDA's warning letters. And I tried to understand the way they write the observation, how it reflects their expectation. And it seems to me that they're always trying to thread a needle through the entire process. You might see a problem at one end, right? That's what they're talking about. But they're trying to build a story through those observations or the set of observations in some way, the best way they can based on the current QSR, right? If QMSR comes, I'm sure their language will change and the way they write observations will change. But to me, it's very insightful to learn and understand their expectation about how the whole process should work. But their concern is only safety and effectiveness. Regulatory concern is primarily safety and effectiveness. At the organization level, we serve our customers. So product quality is also a big concern for us. 13485 includes that concern. How we implement that in a way which doesn't take away, resources to just maintain documentation and really help us focus on the customer experience and also on regulatory compliance from a safety effectiveness point of view. I personally believe that would be a significant execution challenge. But again, I'm open to hearing from you guys. What are your thoughts? And especially those of you who are already dealing with it day to day, dealing with 13485 requirements and FDA requirements. How do you feel? Do you think it's going to be easier for you? Or do you feel like FDA is going to be looking even more closely at your processes and now be empowered because QSR will change, be empowered to cite you? I think that they have not been as open and able to cite you explicitly because QSR is what QSR is. So that is one of the concerns I feel is kind of looming ahead, but that's just my thought. What do you guys think?
Well, one of the things behind how they write things is that they have to write it so that when the courts get involved,
Correct.
it has to be a legally defensible position.
Correct.
So that's their first obligation when they're writing within the agency. And that's what they teach them, is how to go back and cite the section of the regulation that is in violation and so on, and build that court case. So that makes it a little bit different than what our notified bodies have to write.
Correct. But can we not extrapolate now that in QMSR, under QMSR, they will be able to write a little bit more freely or more in a more detailed way where they find a deficiency? That's what I'm asking. Is QSR is what QSR is today, but with 13485 integration in it, FDA, I believe, will have now the ability to cite and write in a way which is probably broader and forces you to. 13485 is big on a process approach, correct? End to end, inputs and outputs. How do we control those for every process? When I read the current FDA warning letters, I get an insight that they are really questioning the process, not just the compliance part of it, just the process, how the process is working for you. So again, as I said, I do this all the time. So you guys are probably so busy doing all the product development and launch and addressing all the issues. Maybe I read too much. So I'm looking for your feedback and your understanding of what this could be, how you are dealing with it, how you are thinking about it. So please share your thoughts on a practical level. Anybody? Thoughts?
It's interesting. I guess back in 1996, when the last version of the CFR 820 came out and design control became something new, I thought initially that, they were going to hit it hard, but I think that they were going through a learning curve. This may not be the same at this stage, trying to have the QMSR in place, but I'm hoping that there'll be some sort of learning curve, meaning they may not come as heavy and hard. And of course, if they do begin to have more opportunity to utilize the additional benefit of leaning on 1345. Hopefully, if they do come out with observations, they'll have the same feeling, perhaps, of a notified body. They won't be having the same enforcement, this is a risk to patient safety type of tone, and maybe it'll be a little bit softened. That's at least my hope.
Hopefully, but I feel like it's gonna emphasize a process-based approach. By process-based approach, what I mean is just look at the CAPA process by itself, inputs and outputs. Right now, all they can say is your CAPA procedure is not adequate. That's the language they use. They cannot claim that the process is not effective, right? But what they are saying behind the scenes is that your process is not effective because you have repeat CAPAs on the same issue, something like that, maybe, or you're not identifying CAPAs where you should be identifying. So when you question the effectiveness of the process in the context of safety and effectiveness of your product, I believe it broadens the scope. It's not about compliance anymore. It's about really making sure that the process is being run correctly. It has the right metrics, it has the right resources. So probably it opens up a little bit more scrutiny. And you're right, there'll be a learning curve both for the FDA and the industry. But you can see it coming in the future is that the whole emphasis is on end-to-end process effectiveness, right? And especially in light of, Ed, you mentioned all the digital health-based software products that are coming out. I sense, and Bijan, I think you have great expertise in that area, software risk management will become absolutely critical. It's not a product that gets manufactured in a factory, right? It's a product that's designed and built and developed and still has to be managed within the same QMS. So how do you do that and ensure that you have effective risk management or risk control process for your software development? I think that it's probably a sign of, personally, I feel it's a sign of our changing world. Technology is changing, and it's probably setting the stage in the future for really enforcing effectiveness, not just compliance. That's my view. And I wanted to just bring that up to you guys for awareness and see what you feel about that.
Well,
Thoughts,
behind the scenes, FDA is doing the case for quality initiative.
Absolutely.
And that is folding up there.
Yep.
I'm involved with some training of FDA personnel right now. And it's behind the case for quality, but it includes 1345 in it. And we have trained several hundred employees at the FDA. And they're preparing for this shift.
Yep.
And they're, the case for quality is becoming more important to them. And quality includes availability of product. So if you look at some of the guidance documents now, for instance, the one on benefit to risk for post-market, it talks about making decisions on recalls and post-market actions based upon availability of that treatment or that product for the patients. And if you look back at the consent decree that they did with Abbott Diagnostics years ago, one of the things they did was they allowed 125 products to remain on the market because there was no alternative treatment available. So the FDA has a history of taking that into consideration.
Yeah, it's a dual role. But let me ask very quickly though, everybody, are you guys familiar with case for quality? If not, I think we should talk a little bit more about that. Rest of the folks on the forum, are you familiar with case for quality initiative from the FDA?
No, I'm not, Naveen. I'd like to hear about it.
Ed, since you're so directly involved, sorry to put you on the spot, but would you like to share what that program is and what
I don't have enough information to be able to talk about that. My role is training 820 and 1345 and how they're the same or different.
Okay. So I can share a little bit of perspective on that. So it's basically a program that they have created through MDIC. MDIC is like a not public, not private, it's kind of in the middle. And it's a carrot and stick approach that FDA is taking. they are giving you a carrot that if you, and you go through an assessment, by the way, it's not an inspection, it's an assessment, and you get some kind of a rating. You have stages of evolution. And if you're able to demonstrate that your quality systems are, in my interpretation, effective, working well, achieving the objectives, safety and effectiveness is good, you get a lot of benefits from the FDA in terms of your PMA supplement approval timelines, in terms of your pre-market, other pre-market activities, a lot of benefits. So it's a carrot and stick approach. It's going to be very, very applicable for software because, as you guys know, FDA has established a digital health center of excellence. I don't remember the exact acronym. And they are developing specific policies of enforcement and regulation for digital health products. Keep an eye on that in the future. And it is all designed to tell you that if you do quality right, compliance is compliance, but if you do quality right, you'll have a good time with the FDA. That's how I read it. You'll have an easier time in your pre-market activities. So it's a significant, I think, area of opportunity for manufacturers in my view. Small, large, medium doesn't matter. In fact, small organizations will benefit even more because it'll make them more competitive. That they can significantly accelerate the launch timeline and marketing timeline because FDA is going to be a willing partner with them. And I'm not an FDA person, so I may be speaking too much on their behalf or reading too much into what I see out there. But this is a general trend I feel in the industry because FDA is probably also struggling to keep up with the pace of technology and evolution of technology. And they have to be not hindering innovation. Like Ed mentioned, even if the product is not technically meeting compliance requirements, they have to let it sit on the market because there's no other option. Benefit risk is subject to availability as well. So Case for Quality is a very interesting initiative. Keep an eye on it. I think it's going to get a lot bigger in future, especially in light of this move towards QMSR, and everything seems to be kind of coming together. That's my view. Ed, does that make sense with your understanding, or did I kind of read too much into it?
No, you I think are in the appropriate level of thinking. The only thing that may happen is we now have a new FDA commissioner. So how is he going to change things?
Right.
Because that every time there's a change in commissioner, we get a change in emphasis. Of course, CDRH's management right now is the same. Yep. And has been for quite some time, well established. And these initiatives have been around. Case for Quality has been around quite a few years. I had an opportunity to get involved at one point, but I had too many things going on and couldn't. But it's something that they're definitely looking at. We as an industry should be looking at it because from my quality training years ago under Dr. Joseph Duran, I know that if we can improve the quality of the product, we're going to make more money and we're going to sell more product. And it's just the right way to go. And one of the things that has happened in the US is we've focused on profit for next quarter. And that has just destroyed the idea that we make these incremental improvements to make product better and get it out there so that and we can sell more.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think market pressure will always be there, Ed. And we have, but at the end of the day, doing quality right matters and effectiveness matters. And I hope that is the intent here. So guys, I know we have talked about, go ahead.
Toyota and Honda showed us that years ago. That,
yes.
Yeah. And we should still be paying attention to their learnings.
Yep. So I know, guys, we have talked about this quite a lot today. Any closing thoughts and comments on that? Because I also want to open the forum for other questions you guys might have. And we'll talk more again in future as things develop and as we learn more. But any other thoughts and comments on this?
The only thing I'll say, Naveen, is you can go on the Federal Register website and you can read all of the comments that have been submitted to this point.
Yep.
So if you want to learn what's going on in the industry, there's a good place to go.
Good thought. Yeah. And also just echoing what you said before, Ed, we encourage all of us in the industry to participate and maybe share our perspective. And that'll only be helpful in the long run. Okay.
I have a question, Navi.
Go ahead, Bijan.
For the group. So I think companies are accountable to regulatory agencies for product safety and effectiveness. But when it comes to managing business risk, are companies accountable to, say, an FDA? Isn't it just a company's business if they choose to lose money? Ed, what do you think?
They're accountable to the Securities and Exchange Commission if they, on the business side, and their shareholders if they're a public company. So that's probably where the business risk focus is.
Yeah,
So
but I would say,
31.
go ahead, Bijan.
I was
Sorry.
thinking with respect to ISO 31000. So if a company is not well managed, yeah, the shareholders care, but do they have to account? They're not going to get a warning letter because your product is not that profitable, right?
Yeah,
That's right.
But here's what my personal feeling is. I think we have, for I don't know, some reason, separated or assumed that shareholders are not interested in product safety and effectiveness. I think I feel this way, and I could be wrong about this. We seem to feel that shareholders do not care about safety and effectiveness because there's an assumption. If FDA has given you an okay, we are good. But believe me, if there is a recall announcement that gets heavily publicized, shareholders will care. They will. It's a risk that has to be managed and is managed. I have worked for big corporations for many, many years. Boardroom discussions are not without, they do involve safety, effectiveness, risk. But there's always an assumption. If we are not in trouble with the FDA, we are okay.
Right.
If we are, go fix it. So I would like us to not make the assumption that business and shareholders do not care about product safety and effectiveness. They do, but they have many other risks to worry about. They take prioritization. And Bijan, you're absolutely right. In many cases, I think companies can make a decision which actually may result in a financial loss. And many companies actually do that on principle. And I was fortunate to work for one of that company. They do that on principle because they know long-term brand equity matters. So coming back to 31,000, if you implement 31,000 in its spirit, right, you would actually by default, I believe, improve safety and effectiveness. And I'm so passionate about this because I've participated in big high-level boardroom discussions where I was presenting data and people's eyes were kind of wide open. Why did we not know this before? But that's a question about effectiveness of our management review process. We fixed it. We went ahead and fixed that. Every management review going forward was talking not only about what has happened in the past, but what signals do we anticipate from the market through post-market that may become a problem 6 months, 1 year down the road. We talked about that. Mm-hmm. So I think we make a lot of assumptions, and Bijan, you're very good. I think it's very smart to point that out. Is companies make that choice all the time, and those who don't soon realize that choice is forced on them because suddenly you have a big recall announcement. FDA safety alerts are public, right? Everyone can go see them. And there's more and more awareness on social media, on consumers, on patients, on doctors, right? I do believe it's a consideration. So I don't know, Bijan, if this is where you were going, but I kind of went on a tangent. And I apologize for that. I go on a tangent.
I'm just curious if FDA aligning more with ISO 13485, and as you mentioned, is just not only about product safety, it's also business risk. Does that make the FDA, does that give FDA the right to hold the company accountable for things other than product safety and effectiveness?
No.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, I don't think they can enforce anything except what's written in the QSR or QMSR.
Well,
they
you
won't be
got to
able
go
to
back
say,
and look at the Food, Drug and Cosmetic Act for their basis of, in fact, and
Yeah.
that's not in the act, so they can't do anything.
right.
that.
They need to be able to link it there. And I think they're very, very careful about what they write and how they write. They're very careful about how they cite you. What objection do they find? It's not opinion. It is based on what's the regulation, what was the deficiency, what was your response, why was the response not adequate, all that. Now, they're not going to come out and say, if you do this, you will gain with shareholders, or if you don't do this, you won't gain with shareholders, right? That's a market risk that the company has to manage. But they will definitely make sure they write it very clearly. If you don't do this, this is how you will violate the FDNC, I believe. I mean, that's the state, that's what their approach is. But you can feel the undercurrent is get your quality right. Get your system right. That's what they are saying. Make sense, guy? Any thoughts? I know we are talking about a lot of other topics than just risk management, but that's the whole point of this conversation, is that we kind of go in different directions, hoping that this free conversation will allow us to engage in, more open dialogue. What do you guys think? Any other thoughts and questions, comments on that, or other topic? Any other risk management topic that you might be thinking about talking today? Please bring it up. Any issue you are facing in your system that you would like to share?
Hi, Naveen.
So
My name is Salim.
Yes,
Can you hear
Salim.
me?
Yes, we can hear you, Salim. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. My background is mostly aerospace industry risk management. But recently I'm working on a 14971 series related to, risk assessment. So in aerospace industry, I have seen that, okay, we distinguish between hardware and software. When it comes to software, we design the DAL level, design, what do you call it, design assurance level, and we don't calculate the probability. And the product that I'm dealing with 14971, I saw in the company, they do the risk assessment by, severity and probability. But it is, FDA says that, as I read, like, medical device, it could be software, it could be hardware, it could be both. But I saw in the company that they are basically doing the probability for the software products as well, which is medical, they are certifying as a medical device. But this is completely new for me. I haven't seen, finding probability for a software product. Probability for software failure is always one. I mean, the improvement we can make by quality analysis, by testing, the more testing we did, we find a problem associated with the software. But in this particular company, and it looks like they are certifying in that way. So I would like to know from medical device perspective, how you guys have, all of you have more experience than me, how, when it comes to a software medical device, 14971, what it says, and the probability part, how we handle, so that ultimately we can do the risk assessment.
So Salim, I think you're in good luck here, because we have two excellent experts today.
Yeah.
Both Bijan and Ed have enormous expertise in the area. So I would invite them to share their views on this.
Bijan, do you want to go first?
No, you look like you're about to start, so I'll listen.
Well, I don't know if you're aware, Salim, but there is a guidance document that goes with 14971, 24971, ISO TR 24971. And I believe there's a little bit of discussion there, but there's also some FDA guidance documents on software. And if it's purely a software issue, then the probability should be 1, as you suggested. If, however, it's associated between the software and the hardware that it's running on, and there's a failure in the hardware that impacts the software, then you may be able to calculate a probability other than 1. And sometimes what companies try to do is they try to blame it on the hardware, and they want to get away from the software part of it. But the answer is that the software will always fail when you go down the same branch, and that's a probability of 1. So if you execute, if the choices in software are infinitesimal, But if you make that choice where you're going to go down that path, it's going to fail, period. It's one. Okay. But if there's some impact due to the hardware the software is running on, then you may be able to calculate a probability. But if you can't calculate it, then it's one. Bijan?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So Salim, what they are saying is that not that the software will fail 100% of the time, because otherwise, why would we even have software, right? Clearly, it doesn't. But what they're saying is that in fact, ISO 62304 says there is no consensus on determining the probability of software failure. So this is saying that we don't know whether we have found all the bugs. So since we don't know, let's assume there is a bug. That bug may cause a software failure under proper circumstances. As Ed was saying, when you create the right circumstances, you go down the same path. But we don't always have those right circumstances. That's why software works most of the time. So for software risk management, you are looking at what is the risk of creating harm. And then you look at the chain of events that could lead to that harm. Sometimes there is software in there. Sometimes there's software and hardware. Sometimes it's just hardware. So then we're talking about circumstances where you have software involved. Then there's two conditions. One, if there's software and hardware, in that case, if you create a chain of events that leads to the harm, and there's hardware involved, you assign the probability of failure for software as one, and you leverage the probability of failure of the hardware. If you have just software, there's nothing else. It's just like software fails and create harm. You have to assume that its probability of failure is one, and then just look at what are the consequences. However, there's another caveat to ISO 62304 gives you another way out. It says that if your software is legacy software for which you have collected data, and this data has to be quality and reliable, then you can use that field experience as a probability of failure of the software. In that case, you can change it from a 1 to something less than 1.
Salim, does that answer your question?
It answers my questions. My thoughts were along that line as well. The only thing, there is no specific guideline or specific to like the tabular format, the probability from 14971, right? It would be different for company to company. What I saw in that company particularly, like, they are having a meeting, group of guys, and, they are saying, oh, this is, okay, severity is always constant. It doesn't matter, like, severity remains same, and they are just playing with the probability. Initial probability was maybe very high, and then they were reducing it to implausible. But when it comes to justification, it was just on the surface.
So Salim, I'm going to ask you a question. Is this analysis done in the presence of medical professionals, like people in that company who are experts in medical?
Yes.
They have a medical experience. Are they involved in this analysis?
Clinical persons were there generally in the meeting. But then again, they are clinical persons. They don't have like, I'm not sure how much they know about probability statistics and those parts.
No, I didn't mean to say that. Not everyone has to know about probability, but this analysis of the sequence of events that Bijan talked about is very important.
Okay.
And it's only after you articulate as clearly as possible, write it down. This chain of events that are anticipated in the case of that specific failure. You have to build a map. Without that map, you cannot do probability of harm. If you focus only the probability of the software failure, you have done only half the activity.
Okay.
So you need to do the work with the clinical specialists, building the chain of events. And it may be frustrating because you don't know what chain of events might happen. There might be many more chain of events. But as much as possible, if you can do that, then you can do the overall probability of harm estimate. Regardless, I mean, you will do the probability of software failure. Even if you assume that to be a 1, it doesn't automatically mean that the probability of harm is also 100%. Does that make sense? So if you read 24971, like Ed mentioned, you will get a lot of insight out of that. But I would strongly recommend this analysis with people with actual clinical expertise working with that type of software or different similar software in the intended use scenario.
Actual current clinical experience.
Yes,
I've been in
actual current
companies
client.
where the clinician worked in the OR 15 years ago.
But Ed,
And they're still depending on them for their clinical experience. And it's not current.
honestly speaking, I would rather have that than have no clinical person.
Well, yes,
Right.
yes, but I
cannot
want
believe-
somebody that knows what's going on today.
Yeah.
We had
so-
to change the design of one of our devices because they changed the clinical experience because the government changed the law 1976. And we had to change the design of all of our products because the clinical procedures changed because of a federal regulation.
So I'll share this with everybody here. Like, I'm an engineer by training, okay? But it wasn't until I started working with medical experts 10 years ago that I fully understood risk management. I say that every day. And if there is one person I would rely on for risk management, for safety, medical people are number one in my opinion.
Yep.
Right, many times. So I will emphasize it over and over again. Get them in, beg, borrow, steal resources if you have to. If you're the risk manager, beg, borrow, steal, but get them in your risk analysis. Very well, guys. Anybody has any other last thoughts and comments? Bijan, go ahead.
Yeah, just one question actually for Salim. So you said you come from aerospace. Salim, so they don't, sounds like from what you said, they don't manage risk in aerospace.
Well, they do. So it's well, I mean, but they distinguish between software and hardware. They are done at different level, the system to systems level, like the OEM, the guy who is making the plane actually, and they lower it down to the different systems, and they do something called system functional hazard analysis. So they take a system, try to find the functions and what are the effect of those functional failure. Loss of function, partial loss of function, abnormal, and then they try to distinguish between software and hardware. If it is software, they say that, okay, this is level A, associated with catastrophic event, do it by validation and verification.
Salim, I want to emphasize the word management because I think in aerospace, they don't manage risk. Manage risk means you accept that risk exists, you try to estimate it, and then you balance it. I think in aerospace, what they're trying to do, they're trying to avoid accidents or mishaps. And there's no probability. It's just, can we prevent it? And they just hope that they have. Do you agree with that?
There are two approaches. One is of course, the probability based. We do have to do fault trees and other things depending upon the hazardous cases. This is depending up at system level. System fails, but there is another approach called particular risk analysis. In this case, they directly consider that this event will happen, and now you reduce the risk as much as possible. For example, say bird strike. Like, but they don't do any probability analysis there. Bird strike will happen, just minimize it. Similarly,
you do risk control without risk estimation, I think is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very, very good discussion, guys, like always. And we don't know where the hour went, right? So thank you again for joining. And I would just close by informing some of you, you are already aware, some of you are not, my knowledge sharing forum. Can everybody see the screen here?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you will get a link to sign up. It's free to register, and it's a great way to continue our conversation and dialogue. It's also a great way to let others know what kind of challenges you are facing, because it'll feed into this discussion. You know, I decide on the theme or the topic based on what people are interested in. Sometimes I do a LinkedIn poll, but sometimes I also go see what people are talking about on the forum. So I really invite you to engage. Some of you are already there and contributing in a very big way. We have over 150 people on this forum right now, and it's a closed forum. So I monitor and moderate. You will not have any troubles or any spam. I can guarantee that. So take a look and join if you can. With that, I want to just see if you guys have, Bijan, you have another last comment, please go ahead.
No, I'm applauding.
Okay, thank you.
Good job.
Thank you.
Me
But-
too. Me too, Naveen.
But I hope it continues to be of value to you guys, right? That's the whole point.
Yep.
The whole point is to learn from each other. So come back again, tell your friends, tell your colleagues. It's going to be always the third Friday of every month. I've decided. Some people may join, some people may not join, but you know when it's going to happen. And you will have enough advance a notification about when the next one is. But I always look for your feedback about the theme. What should be our theme? And even with that, we want to leave room open for open questions. Make sense?
Yep.
Great, guys. Thank you again, and have a
Thank
good
you.
weekend.